Okay, so in this tutorial, or maybe it'll be a two-parter, just want to cover getting data in from a spreadsheet, from a CSV file. In this case, working with a student who's curious about weather data. So I've gone to the NOAA.gov site, kind of dug down in there, and what I've done is downloaded the maximum and minimum temperature in Celsius in tenths of a degree. Important to read the fine print on your data that you download. So this is all the full entire year from Blacksburg, Radford, and Christiansburg. So anyways, so what I want to do is create a little visualization that shows the temperatures. We'll use this maybe as the daytime high and the nightly low. So let's go ahead and dive on in. I've created a sketch here, which is the basics. I've kind of run through this to get all my ducks in a row. So we'll build off the sketch here that I've shown how this was playing. So what we're going to do is we just need to feed in this information into the colors that are going to change these two ellipses here. All right, but so how do we download the data? And there's lots of different ways to download data and get it into processing. So if you've not already, totally advise in the tutorial section checking out the new data tutorial, stuff on importing strings and all kinds of things like that. Of interest to us is tabular data here. And here we want to use, here's the example of what we want to get at here in this. Using the table object. Table, we're going to use something called table row. So instead of writing a class, maybe I'm lazy, I don't know what the performance hit for something like this, but I'm just going to write my own. Let's do it data. Give us a little space. Normally I would create a second tab for this. I'm just going to shuttle back and forth. Alright, so we want to use loadData, and the first thing we are going to need is a table. So we'll just call it table. And then we're going to use table row. Oops. And I like to just continue to just check and make sure that everything's loading as we go along. Alright, so we're going to have those two objects. And let's say row equals load table. And if you need to, I often have to just consult with the documentation here on how that gets loaded. So let's do load table. And I'm trying to remember what my name of that file is. I think daily temperatures. Oh, CS. Oops, CSV. And we'll do header. See if we can get away with that. And the other thing too is this is its own little class, or own little function. So let's go ahead and put it up here to load data. Oops. Duh. Sorry. Alright. So that's working. Moving right along here. Alright, so our little custom function is loading this information. And really what I want to do is I want to load the data once. I should explain this here. And then I'm just going to fit it right up into setup. And as I go along, I want this information to be equal to something else. So the other bit of data that I'm going to need is I'm going to need a minimum temperature, and that's going to be an array. Oops. Need to tell what kind of data, so let's say float min temp that array, right, and float x temp, and we need to initialize those. So min temp equals new float, and we need to put a value in here. And when we looked at this here, one thing to keep in mind for the spreadsheet that I downloaded here, it has every day of the year for Blacksburg, but it also has Radford and Christiansburg locations. So I need to tell it how much of this I want to load. And since it's going to be a year, just go ahead and say integer year equals 365, right? So, and I guess we can put that, doesn't need to be, I might use this in a couple places, I guess. So we'll just leave that there, and let's put year. Let's copy that. Tell it to run, see if we have any errors. All right, that's good. Okay, so we've created these new objects here. So this is where it gets maybe a little tricky. So the table is basically saying, like, let's load this table or tabular data, like all the data that's in there, into this object. But then we need to break down the object. And we can do things, let's refer to the documentation here. This shows an example here. You can basically say this variable is, we're going to start with the table, and then we'll get inside of it. We'll ask for an integer that would be the column and the row. So everything starts with 0, so this would be 0 and 1, and then this would be 0, 1, this would be 0 and 1, and then this here is the header, so it doesn't get counted in the rows, so this would be 0, 1, 2. So you could just do something with the table, but as the documentation here talks about, I mean, normally you want to get lots and lots of data, so it's not a good idea to just grab from the table, and that's why we're going to use table row. Table row is going to allow us to get all the rows in an iterative fashion. So we load up all this data like on this row, and then we can make it equal to whatever the arrays are that we're going to load all this data into. And because we're going to iterate, we need a for loop. I equals 0. I is going to be less than years, or what do we call it, year? And I plus. Okay, so we've already loaded the table, but now we need to access the different rows and columns, if you want to, out of that. So let's say, so now we're going to access this table row object. So we'll say row equals, and then we're going to go into the table, and we're going to get a row, or ret a row, get a row, and we're going to get row I, right? So let's see if we have any errors. Yay, no problem so far. And then we need to break that up. So what we want to do is get each one of these chunks of data, and we want to associate them with these arrays here, right? We want to load them into these arrays so that we do this once up in setup, we load the data, and then after here, it would just be us using this information, right? We've already have it stored in these other places. So what did we name these here? Min temp I is going to equal, so we now have row, and the row equals these things, and now we need to extract out the different information in each one of those rows. So this would, you know, we have the table loaded, row is going to load the first bit of information, so it would load all these here. So now we'll say row dot, now we want to get something, so let's say get And in this case, we want to do float. Oh, where's my CSV here? Okay, so I mean, these are set up as integers, but I'm going to break them. I would convert them down to floats anyway, so I'm just going to do that kind of in the process right now. All right, so get, if I can spell, get float. And then the parameter that it asks for is whatever the name of the header. When we loaded the table, we said this is the object or this is the file, and we're going to have a header in here. So just look at the documentation for table. It gives some explanation about what parameters, arguments go in here. So we can see here's a column called tmax. So in fact, let's do, since this is the min, we want tmin. Right? And let's copy all of this. And we're going to get the float from tmax. Right, so get float. That makes sense. Let's go ahead and run, see if we get any errors. All right, so that's good. Yay! Let's back up here. Thought maybe I was missing me a curly bracket. All right, so that's fine right now. The one thing about this data is that as we look through the temperatures, we have all these different values. In fact, you know what? I'm looking at my time here. It's been about 10 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and save this as part 1. And then we'll come back to part 2. In part 2, what we want to do is we've got this data here, and now we want to talk about how we want to use it. So this is the other part of any kind of data visualization, is how to put the numbers into a range or something that's interesting or fits what we want to do. Now in this case, what I want to do is take these temperatures and make them correlate to color in such a way so that we can see, hey, when it's it's hottest for the year, it's kind of red, and when it's the nightly lows are cool in the winter, we get kind of a blue color. So I'll stop right there, and we'll come back with part 2 here in a minute.